Hi Line Sniper community, this is Daniel Chiang coming to you from Line Sniper, and today I'm going to be breaking down my $500,000 Saints futures bet to win the Super Bowl. Alright, so to kick it off, where did I bet this? I bet this price at the beginning of the season at two different places, William Hill as well as BetMGM at 11 to 1 as well as 12 to 1 to win the Super Bowl. So approximately we have it to win 264,000 take back at William Hill and 135 take back at BetMGM, and we also have another bet for $100,000 at 6 to 1 to win the conference finals at BetMGM. So alright, so taking you through a little bit about how I thought about this bet, why I really like the Saints this year, and just some preseason thoughts before the season started when I first placed these bets. So what does everyone know about the Saints? Everyone knows the Saints' tumultuous history about losing close games in the playoffs. So for the past 3 years, the Saints have lost to the Vikings in overtime last year, 2019. They lost to the Rams in 2018 in that terrible pass interference call, and they lost to the Vikings again in 2017, all one-score games. So why did I like the Saints so much going into 2020? Well, first of all, as you know at Line Sniper, we're heavily into the statistics. So let's take a look quickly at some of the statistics around the Saints. One statistic that a lot of sports bettors look at, particularly NFL analysts, is DVOA. We actually thought out of all the teams in the NFL, including the Chiefs, including the Buccaneers, etc., that the Saints had the highest chance to win the Super Bowl at 14%, tied with the Chiefs. However, if you looked at the Chiefs' odds to win the Super Bowl at the beginning of the year, it was something like plus 550. The Saints at plus 1200 offered much better value in a conference that was much weaker than the AFC, which included other strong projected teams like the Baltimore Ravens, etc. The NFC, on the other hand, really only had the Saints as top of the tier class teams. So, how did the Saints roster look at the beginning of the season? This included Drew Brees, under the helm, a veteran of the sport, very accurate arm, getting older though, so there were some questions about how Drew Brees would last throughout the season. Now, they also signed up a few backups. They have Taysom Hill as backup QB as well as Jameis Winston, which we will see played a pretty significant part in this season, just having an extra layer of security blanket to get through some of those regular season games when your quarterback is a little bit older. Now, they also had kind of what I call their big trio of Brees, Alvin Kamara, and Michael Thomas. As you know, Alvin Kamara is definitely one of the top 5 running backs in the league and a particularly explosive pass catcher out of the backfield. We also have Michael Thomas, who has a great connection with Drew Brees on the field. Very accurate, probably one of the top receivers last year, definitely top 5, and kind of considered the best receiver last year. The Saints also have a very strong secondary group of players, led by Emmanuel Sanders, who they picked up this year to really be the true secondary option for Michael Thomas at the wide receiver spot. They have tight end Cook, who's a great pass catcher, as well as Taysom Hill, who's really Sean Payton is able to use to the best of his ability. What makes the Saints such an intriguing team, particularly in a COVID type environment, is that the Saints are extremely well-rounded. This allows them to suffer a ton of injuries this year and really battle through all the different ups and downs of the season, especially in a season like COVID, where we expect many players to go down, particularly star players for a few games at a time. We really wanted to see a good deal of depth on the team to be able to withstand some of those injuries as well as COVID restrictions. So, where did the Saints' depth come from? First and foremost, it comes from their offensive line, which is highly underrated in the NFL. They also have a fantastic defense, led by, a great front four, which includes Cam Jordan, a perennial Pro Bowler, Davenport, Hendrickson, which actually ended up leading the team in sacks this year and highly outperformed kind of what the preseason metrics were projecting out for him, as well as a very strong secondary with guys like Lattimore, etc., that can defend the pass up and down the field. With that being said, we saw an extremely well-rounded team that was backed by the metrics that was underrated by the market due to some of the preseason effects of their, early playoff exits over the last few years. As you can see, here is a graph of how the Saints' future odds have trended over the season. So, let's look at the Saints season and how it evolved and how it actually affected my futures bets and my thought process during many of these games and key moments during the season. Alright, so we started off the season with arguably one of the most important games for the Saints, and their first game of the year was against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which, if you remember, had probably the most preseason hype out of any team in the NFL, particularly with the addition of Tom Brady to the Buccaneers. So, how did that game go? Obviously, as you can look back on the history, it ended up pretty good for the Saints and was actually my favorite bet of that Week 1 NFL slate. So they ended up winning that first game versus the Buccaneers, and I felt extremely good. In fact, I thought, the Saints are pretty much a lock to get that first seed in the NFL, and really there weren't going to be any major issue. Unfortunately, during that game, we saw Michael Thomas sustain a small injury to his heel and ankle, and that affected him to miss a couple of the future games. And Michael Thomas, in my opinion, presents that safety net for Drew Brees that really allows the offense to keep on chugging. When Drew Brees needs that 3rd and 4 down, he's going to be their primary target. So I thought that Michael Thomas' injury really presented a significant challenge to the Saints that was underrated by the market. That led them to losing their next 2 games against 2 fairly good teams, the Raiders as well as the Packers. The injury to Thomas presented a big issue. They lost their next 2 games, and we start to get a little bit worried about the Saints. However, at this opportunity, you didn't really see, as you can see in the graph, the futures odds move that much. So, what happened next that really affected the Saints? The biggest next piece of news was Drew Brees having a massive rib injury. As you can see, he got really badly hit and really tore up his ribs for a couple weeks. Now, that led to the big decision by someone who we haven't talked a lot about in this video, but Sean Payton, who represents one of the better offensive minds in the NFL. Now, if you've listened to any of the Line Sniper content before, you know my opinion on NFL coaches, and it's extremely poor. But Sean Payton represents the upper echelon of that group, and we would say that pretty much he's a top 5 coach every year, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. He was able to make a decision to actually replace Brees, which surprised most people, by Taysom Hill, who was able to drive the offense, and really they shifted the offense around Taysom Hill to revolve much more around the running game and the quarterback run game, which we don't see at all from Brees. And that allowed us to clearly see the really fantastic defense that the Saints has that was able to hold opponents consistently down to, single digits or low double digit scores. Now, the Saints also had to overcome a few different injuries, which included a COVID scare with the entire running back group in the last couple weeks of the season, further injuries to Michael Thomas, which they were able to shut down given, their strong performance, and they were able to ultimately get into the NFL playoffs, largely with a healthy roster. Now, the one game that I thought was a crucial game for the Saints that they ended up losing, unfortunately, was the loss to the Eagles. It's obviously a bad loss to a team that wasn't particularly good, which, in my opinion, the Saints largely underlooked. But what really affected the most important piece of this game was because of the loss to the Eagles, the Saints actually lost the 1 seed to the Packers. Now, because the Saints lost to the Packers early on in the year, the Packers owned the tiebreak against the Saints. Let's look at kind of how the Saints team lined up with all the different player stats at the end of the regular season. We saw Kamara largely was the star of the offense, and let's look at kind of his biggest moment of his NFL career, especially this year, which was his 6th touchdown performance on Christmas Day. We had a great defensive line, as expected at the beginning of the year, led by Cam Jordan, but also standout star Trey Hendrickson that was able to record 13.5 sacks. And now that takes us to the NFL playoffs. The Saints secure the 2 seed, which means they don't get that first round bye, but they're able to play a relatively weak team in the Bears going into the wildcard weekend. The Bears were 10-point underdogs to the Saints, which was largely expected by us going into wildcard round. The end result ultimately were the Saints were able to win despite a few mistakes. They didn't play particularly well in my opinion, but the defense played fantastic as expected, which showed their well-roundedness, and the offense did enough to win the game. We think that, Brees was a little bit rusty still. Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara were coming back from having not played for a few weeks. So really, this was kind of what I believe a strong warm-up game for the Saints going into the Bucs game. So, Bucs versus the Saints. Now, they played twice already this season, and this is going to be their third meeting. The spread for this game currently is Saints at home -3, which leads us to about a projected winning chance of 60.5%. In fact, if you're going to bet any game during this divisional round playoffs, our favorite bet for the week is the New Orleans Saints -3. We think that this number should actually be much closer to 4.5. Alright, so here's a breakdown of the Saints versus a Bucs game. Bucs are on the road at Saints. Now, given the COVID environment, we're not sure how much home field advantage will play in during the playoff rounds. We heard rumblings that the Saints are trying to get capacity up for their stadium during this game, but we're a little skeptical given COVID. So let's say that home field advantage, unfortunately for this game, is minimal. Week 1, their matchup, where the Saints won, we're going to pretty much throw away the statistics and analysis from that game because it was the first week of the season, Brady was getting used to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense, and as a result we think it's probably not a great representation of what that game actually should have been played out as. Week 8, however, we looked at the game going back and we saw the line closed at -3, -110 midpoint, approximately kind of the same line that's getting presented now. And we saw that the Saints were able to blow out the Buccaneers. Typically, this would mean the next game that they play against each other would be lined slightly higher to the Saints. However, this isn't the case for this game. The reasons for that are obviously the Buccaneers have shown that they're a better team than people have expected going into the end of the season. They're able to figure out some of their issues, and they looked fairly good against the Washington football team last week. So we think that there's a little bit of bias towards the Bucs this week, and that leads us to think that as a contrarian bet of the Saints, we think that there's a little bit of value there. It does seem like somehow the Washington football team wasn't able to pressure Brady that much, and Brady was largely unscathed. And that, makes us a little bit worried about the Saints going into this weekend. Another major question for us is, does Hendrickson come back this week? As their leading sack leader of the New Orleans Saints this week, we think that he's a particularly big piece on the defensive line, which could lead to a big disruption to Brady if he's able to play. We think given early reports, he will be able to play, and that's why we're fairly confident. Because we like the side of this game, as you can tell, and we'll be very honest throughout the process, we'll be covering this bet week to week. There will be no hedging on the New Orleans Saints this week, and as a result, we can say, let's go ahead and keep on betting the Saints and hopefully get to have this recap for next week. Alright, with that being said, thank you so much. This is Daniel Chiang from Line Sniper. Please hit the like and subscribe button if you made it this far, and please check out the website www.linesniper.com for more sports betting information. Thank you.